zone. No sexual deviancy allowed. No sexual SP38 has dispatched from the chamber.
Hi, I'm Jacob Kenny.
And I'm Liam McPherson.
It's the newest edition of Jeremy Mackenzie's #1 prison listening recommendation. It's
Speech from the Throne, episode 26. We're here to bring you the latest and greatest from the halls of power.
But not with more secret typhoons clandestinely pulling hurricanes into their Nova Scotia clutches. We're just here to argue.
Hey, what are we arguing about today?
Well, Liam, I think we have to begin this episode with a content warning because one of the key events of the last week was a rape threat made against the wife of newly elected Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. So I should begin with the warning that we will be discussing, not in detail, thank goodness, but just briefly, that threat and mentions of sexual violence. Because this is a serious problem. And it's something that I want to discuss a little bit further. This week, on September 26, Monday, RCMP announced that they were investigating rape threats made against Ana Poilievre, Pierre's wife, by Jeremy Mackenzie. Jeremy Mackenzie is the leader of a far-right organization in Canada called Dialogon, whose stated goal is to build a white ethno-state comprised of the states and territories that would link Alaska to Florida in a perfect geographic diagonal. And obviously this is a horrific thing to happen, and Pierre Poilievre made a strong stance denouncing this man. The problem is even though he thankfully did take the correct step in denouncing him after this threat was made on Mackenzie's far-right podcast, it came to light that actually Pierre Poilievre had met this guy before, and there's actually photos of them shaking hands. This is a big problem. Pierre Poilievre's secret to success has been bringing guys exactly like Jeremy Mackenzie into the Conservative fold. He's bringing in people, he's building a bridge between those traditional Tory voters and the extremists, the radicals, the people that Max Bernier had attracted to the PPC tent. And the latest polling shows that Pierre Poilievre's victory has basically dissolved the PPC. It's entirely been folded up into the Conservative vote. And he feels a vulnerability on his rightward flank, and so he's been adopting these convoy protesters or other cultural grievances, these anti-woke warriors, into his camp. These are the same conspiracy theorists that we've seen several videos of his wife, Ana, combating directly. We've seen quite a few videos of, and in liberal media circles, this is often shown to credit Ana, because she does seem to have really good political instincts as well, just like her husband, in dealing with these people. But she's sort of become this point person against conspiracy theories going in, the one that can offer the softer message, if you will, while Pierre Poilievre does his invectives. And that's dangerous. He's bringing people in who have often violent intentions, and then using his wife as a human shield. So, obviously, Jeremy Mackenzie is personally responsible for what he did, but Pierre Poilievre has to at least acknowledge at some point that he has put his wife in extreme danger with what he's doing, and he's going to make it worse. He's going to make it worse. Already, the party that he leads was not really inclined to like someone like his wife. 70% of Conservative voters believe that there is too much non-white immigration in Canada, according to a 2019 Ecos poll. 70% of Conservative voters believe there's too much non-white immigration in Canada. And his wife is a non-white person immigrated to Canada. And so already the existing Conservative base seem to be people that would not be so inclined to like her. And then Pierre Poilievre's whole political strategy was to go even farther than the Conservative base, to go even farther right. It's really, really, really upsetting the way that he's treated a person that he ostensibly loves, and he's really putting her in the firing ring. Now, this is where I want to go with this, is that I think we liberals need to start pointing this out. I think we're afraid to do that. We don't want to call Pierre Poilievre out on the way that he has treated, the way that he shares some responsibility in this, because we see that he also is a sort of victim, but he's not the victim here. His wife certainly is. He is not. He is the one that is creating this circumstance, that is politically profiting from this circumstance. And we need to show that he is a dangerous person in exactly this sort of way. A person that is willing to sacrifice almost anything for political gain. And that's a message we need to start sending to all women in the Conservative Party. If he is willing to throw his wife under the bus like this, what is he willing to do to you? What is he willing to do to you? The Conservative Party is not going to be a safe place for women with Pierre Poilievre as its leader. If he is intent on bringing these sorts of extremists, these sorts of angry, violent young men into the party, they cannot possibly be safe. And that is the message that liberals need to be taking from events like this. And I'll go further in the podcast explaining how we can do this, but essentially to open my rant here, that's the message I'm trying to say. That this isn't something that just stops at this one news story. This is a chain of events that needs to be extrapolated upon for the average voter. We need to start taking events like this, showing the level of violence and depravity of the supporters that Pierre Poilievre has brought in, and explaining how that is exceptionally dangerous to the people who were already in the Conservative Party, so we can start breaking that movement apart. Because if we don't break that movement apart, as it stands, Pierre Poilievre has a very strong case for winning the next election.
Here's the situation. Everybody's heard of the leopards eating my face party. I never thought the leopards would eat my face. Sobs woman who voted for leopards eating people's faces party. And it's like obviously ridiculous. Like there's no such thing as that party. There's no such thing. But the point is like a lot of people who never voted, who ever voted for Donald Trump, a lot of people who voted for Poilievre in leadership and will vote for him in the general, know full well that he's said and done or associated with terrible things. They know that. But they care not because they don't see themselves as the victim of that. In fact, they're aware that in most cases they would not be the victim of that. As Jacob, as you so eloquently stated, his wife is an example of just that archetype that would or could be devoured by said leopards. And what's interesting is just to pull the focus away from her for a minute and back onto him, because I think this all comes back to him. He was made aware of people he was associating with. Maybe he didn't know who Jeremy Mackenzie was when he initially shook his hand, because politicians do shake thousands of hands every day.
Yeah.
I'm sure he didn't get informed too long afterward. Like, I'm sure it didn't take long to find out due to vigilant reporting by Global News and some of the other outlets on it. There was another incident with James Topp, when you might remember when he marched with James Topp in the summer during the Conservative leadership campaign, and he was called out about that, and Rachel Gilmore of Global News called him out on that and wrote an article about Topp's ties to the white nationalist movement in the country.
Yep.
And he was asked very pointed questions by Global News and decided to respond with a smarmy press release, probably dictated by Jenny Byrne, calling her a so-called journalist.
Basically encouraging people to attack
Yeah,
her.
and Max Bernier did the same. Max Bernier, at the end of the 2021 election, started this trend big time by saying, like, here are these outlets that have... I can't remember exactly the full context, but he basically said, have at them.
Yep.
And then, like, some journalist stood up to him and was like, you're not a journalist, you're a coward, and you're a liar, and everybody's coming for you because of it, or something like really, like, what the fuck? Like, and it just unleashed, like, this torrent of hate. And so that a similar thing happened when Poilievre didn't name her, but everybody knew who he was talking about. And also didn't name Jeremy Mackenzie initially when he was called out. Oh, I've shaken thousands of hands. Like, true, but then he immediately scuppers any sympathy he had for people who actually split hairs, which you should always do with politicians and what they say, folks. You should always split hairs in what they're saying. Yep. Because he refused to name Jeremy Mackenzie by name. He said, this individual. He wouldn't say him by name. Now, when it comes to his wife, the person he loves, of course he's going to say this person's name. Of course he's going to call him a dirtbag. Of course he's going to call him and people like him odious. Of course he's going to do that. He's not going to do it earlier because he's a cynical politician. He's a political animal. The sad part is now we're getting to the moment where, in the political context to this new session of the House, is the Conservatives deciding to... Robin Urbeck put out an article, it was either today or yesterday, great columnist in the Globe and Mail. She put out a column about the Conservatives joining the victimhood parade, which, I take issue with some of her framing there. Like, she's to the right of me, so sometimes she'll frame things a bit like in a way that I wouldn't frame them. But her general point was good. And her point was that the Conservatives are like, they're a serious party historically, right? Conservatives historically are very serious and protective of institutions. And like, even if you're willing to put the Bank of Canada thing aside, a Liberal did go after that too. So you can put that aside, whatever, there's a precedent. They're generally protective of institutions and of the way things are done. And if they know there's a moment to jump out of their chair and start shouting, they'll jump out of their chair and start shouting. But that time doesn't come very often to old school Conservatives. They know when to pick and choose their battles. They know when to jump and shout or when to kind of shrug it off and wait for the more important battles. These Conservatives have started this session. I don't know if you heard what Dale Smith said about Garnett Jean-Louis.
We call him Jean-Louis is how we call it. I thought it was Genuis.
I thought it was Garnett Jean-Louis.
Jean-Louis makes infinite more sense, but I feel like he's pronounced it himself in like a really anglophone way. But...
That's true. It could be Genuis. Well, I'm just going to say Jean-Louis out of spite because I don't have particularly high feelings for this MP, so there's no bias there. He's if for those of you who don't know him and you're not a Conservative, you know that he's one of the most insufferable members of their caucus, like say Mark Garrettson is in the Liberals, or there's always a handful of caucus members in each party that are just insufferable to listen to, and you just don't want to listen to them. And he's one of them. And so you might remember the Prime Minister got, slapped on the wrist for having a nice sing-along on the eve of the Queen's funeral. Who cares? Why do we care? Some people cared very deeply about it, and it was a big problem. So the Conservatives decided to take up the side of people who felt very deeply about it and join the crying committee. And basically, so what they did, or the victimhood parade, whatever it was that Robin Urbach was calling it. So Jean-Louis decides to be a funny man because he is so very funny all the time. He decided to ask a question to the Deputy Prime Minister that was styled in the same format as Bohemian Rhapsody.
Opportunity had just begun, and now this government is going to throw it all away. Money is not easy come, easy go in this economy. So when the government...
seemed to find it particularly funny. He got a handful of small smirks, and there's this independent freelance journalist on the Hill. Everybody knows him well because he's quite pedantic, sometimes to his detriment. Very intelligent guy, Dale Smith. And he basically said, I cannot describe to you, because he was in person covering this. He's like, I cannot describe to you how lame that was, being in the same chamber as what just happened. He said, if horses are that lame, you'd shoot them. And what did the Conservatives do? They joined the crying committee. Jean-Louis says, I don't know if I'm comfortable having this guy in the press gallery. He threatened to shoot me. I just don't feel safe. And it's like, everybody knows it was a turn of phrase. Like, if a Conservative MP said it, is it quite possible that people would be harder on them? Yeah, it's quite, it's possible. But at the same time, they're supposed to be a serious party.
And there are also people that follow Conservative politicians that would shoot whoever they encourage their audience to shoot. There's no one that follows this journalist that's going to go shoot Jean-Louis over something like a terrible Bohemian Rhapsody lyrics. Like, it's the level of threat.
Basically, the mature... I know I've been going on for a while, but I do have an overarching illustrating point about this. And the point is, the mature response from Dale, of course, would have been... sorry, I get it. Maybe it was a clumsy metaphor at the most. He didn't apologize, which is maybe he should have, but he didn't. That's fine. Everybody knew whether he apologized or not. Everybody knew he wasn't going to actually shoot someone. And Garnett Jean-Louis knows this. And if you don't think that he knows this, then you have been completely missing the point.
Just from a pure morality standpoint, the outrage over the comments directed towards Jean-Louis, it really cheapens the outrage that Pierre Poilievre had, rightly, about the comments made towards his wife. If you have the same level of anger directed towards someone who is ideologically set against causing violence towards this woman of color, and you react in exactly the same level of outrage towards someone who's clearly making a joke, perhaps in bad taste, but a joke about an MP who is in a position of a white male MP in a position of power, if you equate those two things in any way, you're not doing what the Conservatives think they're doing, which is taking down the media. What you're doing is cheapening the effect of people like Jeremy Mackenzie making rape threats like this. If you make every single response a partisan circus, then that's how guys like Jeremy Mackenzie are going to react. They're not going to think it's a big deal to say shit like this. I mean, obviously he didn't think it was a big deal. That's why he said it on the podcast. A podcast very similar to ours in many ways, just in like the Mirror Universe version where we're both like extreme far-right activists. Like, it's just him and his buds as far as I can see in the podcast, but they're joking about casually raping the wife of the conservative leader.
Matt Gurney and Jen Gerson from The Line, a Substack publication, called this weeks ago. They said the conservatives are going to attack the media. And not just in the way we've seen in the past. Not just the, oh, that's fake news. Not just like, oh, the mainstream media lies. They are going to make the media their main opponent. And that includes hopping on the outrage train against them. It's all part of their strategy to attack the media. And this illustrates that. Not only did you have Jean-Louis get up and say, oh, you know, we need to revoke his press gallery credentials. We had Andrew Scheer get up not once, but twice, 2 times, trying to get unanimous consent to condemn him or something, I don't know, and also try to get his security credentials revoked. Like, it's just like, my God, you guys are insufferable. This is the kind of stuff that plays great to their base, but if they take this one too far, it is really, really going to risk pissing a lot of people off. And where I come back to the connecting point of this entire podcast with Ana Poilievre and her threats, with conservatives, they only care about the right type of threat. That's what all this illustrates. They don't care if they've got to play with fire to get votes. They don't care if they've got to bully journalists to get votes. They don't care if they have to call for something that they would never call for if they were a serious party to get votes. We've already accepted that this is not going to be a serious party. It is not even going to weigh, like, is he more studious, Poilievre, compared to O'Toole or compared to Scheer? Is he more Harper-like? Sure. This is not Stephen Harper's party. It's not. Whether or not he endorsed the direction the party is going in doesn't matter. This is not your father or your grandfather's conservative party. It's just not. It's an unserious party. And sometimes you can use unserious strategies to win, but they're going to have to be very careful about this strategy now, because if they don't, it will become immediately obvious. People will realize they are being selective with their outrage. People will realize that they are being hypocritical. People will realize that he will call one group of neo-Nazis dirtbags because they insulted his wife and threatened to rape her. But if another threat came up against a liberal politician, if somebody filled him in, if they haven't already, on all the threats some journalists he doesn't like have gotten, in part because of things he said, he's not going to give a shit. This is all part of his game. It's all part of his game. It's about goddamn time that somebody puts some fucking banana peels on his step so he can trip over his own hubris on this, because this could be a trap. This could be a place to trap him.
The conservatives know they have a woman problem. I mean, all of the, or I should say, they know they have a problem with female support. I'm looking at the newly available surveys, one from Ipsos from last week and one from Abacus Data from 2 weeks ago. They both show a very significant gender gap in the conservative support. So the Ipsos polling shows a 13-point gender gap between men and women supporting the Conservative Party. The Abacus tracker shows a 9-point gap. And the Conservatives, I think, are putting a good play in trying to strengthen their support a little bit. So Pierre Poilievre announced he has a woman as his deputy leader, a gay woman as well. It's a very interesting play for him, and very young. I think she's only like 38 or something.
Melissa Lantzman, formerly of Doug Ford's campaign.
Indeed, yes. As well, the party has been using Anna as more of a surrogate for Pierre Poilievre for the female audience. I mean, we've heard much more out of Ana Poilievre than we've ever heard from the wife of Aaron O'Toole, of Andrew Scheer, and certainly of Stephen Harper. Like, this is barely even knew the names of those spouses. Yeah. Ana Poilievre is someone that's actually giving speeches in her own right and is good at delivering them. So there clearly are, the party is clearly using Anna to reach people that they know Pierre cannot reach. Pierre just has a toxic attitude. Like his style, his incredibly acidic, biting style, it's not going to play well with the type of red Tory women that he needs to attract, the suburban women that are really on the fence, that probably have voted very often Conservative in the past, but are now thinking maybe not necessarily they're going to vote Liberal, but they're just not going to vote at all is probably most likely, I'd say. He needs to strengthen that support if he's going to win, particularly in Ontario. And Ana Poilievre is the ideal vehicle to be speaking to those women. And she's clearly trying to do that. I mean, in that acceptance speech for leadership, when she was introducing her husband, she was talking about her life story, trying to be as relatable as possible, discussing her political origin story in the same like working class terms as her husband. If the Conservative Party is working so hard and investing so much of their resources to build sort of empathy between Ana Poilievre and these middle-of-the-road conservative red Tory women in central Canada, I think the Liberals really need to take advantage of that. Because if we see more and more of these sorts of attacks against Ana Poilievre, or if we can just keep with this one attack, but associate Pierre Poilievre's actions with the attack, we can really use the Conservative strategy against them. We have to show that this person that the Conservative Party is trying to make you empathize with, this person's in incredible danger. And it's danger that Pierre Poilievre is either ignoring, or at the worst case scenario, he's adding to the danger. He's making it worse. And there are several ways to make that case. Now, the most obvious would be like ad buys and fake news operations, or just, it's a very simple image you have to do. On one top of the image, it's the news story saying the RCMP is announcing the rape threats, exactly how I started this episode. And on the bottom, it's just him, it's just Pierre Poilievre shaking the guy's hand. I think if you put those two images together, the story's said. And you sell that image, it's easy.
Blast it everywhere.
And blast it everywhere. Blast it everywhere. Everyone needs to know that Pierre Poilievre brought that guy into the house. But remember, the Liberals also are in control of Parliament with the NDP. They can start investigating, and I think they absolutely should be investigating, the list of donors for the Freedom Convoy, because we know there's a bunch of...
Isn't that already happening? Aren't the Mounties already doing
that? The Mounties
are
doing that, and who knows how long, and who knows if it's going to be public. That's why I'm saying you got to use
really.
Parliament. You have to make
fair.
it political so that they can actually produce the information in the way that they want it produced. The RCMP has no real reason to be looking into Conservative Party donors, but we know from reporting that there was around $500,000 of people that supported the Freedom Convoy donated about $500,000 to the Conservative Party during the Conservative Party leadership race. The vast majority of that going to Pierre Poilievre's campaign. So if we know that these ties exist, Parliament can absolutely investigate those ties. Parliament can't, of course, be obvious about it. They can't say we're investigating the Conservative Party, but they can say that we're investigating the political links of donors of the Freedom Convoy. They can start this ball rolling, and it's a ball we absolutely do need to start rolling, because we need to start getting blood on Pierre Poilievre's hands, essentially. We need to start showing his culpability in this. We need to start showing that not only is he making these messages to Freedom Convoy and bringing them in, we got to link the money together. We got to show that he's bringing these people in. We got to show that he's shaking the hands. And then we show that those people he's shaking hands with are violent. The people he's bringing in are violent. That's the sort of investigation that Parliament can open up, and once we have more of those connections, the story writes itself. But we have to be willing to go there, and right now we're not willing to go there. We're being too light.
But here's something that I must drill into the skull of all 30 people listening to this, and hopefully into the Liberals, because I know Trudeau listens from time to time, and it's just have some advice for the big man. So basically, I'm just thinking that absolutely what you're saying we need to do. We need to take it with a level of seriousness. People don't realize, and people still think that like Islamic fundamentalist terrorism is still as big a threat as any of this stuff. I think a lot of people are still living in the early 2000s with the way they've been conditioned to think about what's dangerous and what's not. It's not to say there's no longer a risk from that kind of terrorism, but what I'm saying is I don't think people realize the risk that white supremacist terrorism poses to them. White nationalists are growing in this country, whether we want to admit it or not. That includes Canada, whether we not want to admit it or not. Maybe it's time to admit it. So we definitely need to take that seriously, but we cannot do that. And by we, I mean the Liberal government, like the Canadian government, cannot do that without saying something coherent on the economy. Because as much as to you and I, like the economy matters, like of course, but like we hold other issues like climate change in really high regard and healthcare in really, really high regard, all that stuff. And it's not that Conservatives don't, but with Conservatives, it's the economy stupid. So it's one thing to say, hey, look who he shook hands with, and he's putting his wife in a dangerous position like that. That's pretty fucked up. Like that's one way to raise people's attention, including some conservatives. But you have to use a baseball metaphor, which I don't even watch, you have to knock the ball out of the park. You have to hit a home run. You have to. And the way you hit a home run with that is to, for God's sakes, say something coherent on the economy. When a reporter asks you, what are you going to do to help people with inflation? And you go, let me tell you why we know what we're doing and you shouldn't be concerned. Then it will not matter how many attack ads you put out with Jeremy Mackenzie bathing in, Poilievre's sweat. Like you could make it as nasty and greasy as you wanted. It's not going to sell your message if you're pumping that out on one side and then, hey, I know you guys are really pissed off about this other thing, but we know what we're doing. Just hang in there. We're here for you. We're here. Just hang in there. Like, no, that's not good enough for people. And especially when you go to an extent of when you have such government-itis, like they're like, 7 years into their term now. When you have such government-itis, as they call it, which is when governments have been in power for too long and start to lose sight of what the public thinks. When you have it that bad that not only are you like, trust us, we know what we're doing, but also here's these things we've done in the past that odds are didn't even affect you, and that's why we're doing something. It's just going to make me angry. You're just going to make people angry. So unless they can completely change their tune on the economy, I unfortunately would think that any sort of effort on this side that they're making would probably ultimately fail to, especially with the long tooth of incumbency being as long as it will be if the election happens in 2025 or even 24. People will be right sick of him, and they don't care who the other guy is. They just want the current guy out.
Well, it's hope and fear, Liam. That's the way you got to do it. You have to.
Well, he has to go back to his hope and hard work. He has to go back to that positive message he had in 2015, because the Trudeau we saw in 2015. I know Trudeau 2015 is never going to return, but it was about hope. It was in a sense a kind of populism light. Like, I know that you can and you can't, or there's some debate like whether you can even have populism surrounding the middle class, or whether middle class and working hard to join it qualifies. But it was maybe some sort of populism light in a sense that it galvanized everybody around this guy was going to do something very different from the other guy, and we're tired of the other guy. If he doesn't find that ray of sunshine, maybe it's gone so far up his arse in the last 7 years. If he can reach in and pull out that ray of sunshine, that plus letting everybody know that you take the economy seriously, you have the team, and Poilievre has a bunch of unserious student council presidents, it could potentially work. You wouldn't be able to present it in a way like Stephen Harper, I'm just not ready kind of thing. You'd have to frame it differently. But they really have to be able to walk and chew gum on this, or they're just going to get dinged at the polls.
Well, it's interesting because the New Democratic Party is actually running the attack ads that you would expect the Liberals would be running. But it seems because the NDP feels the heat on a lot of their working class constituency, and that because the NDP support is so soft in many of these sorts of elections, their voters can so easily flip to the Liberal Party when there is a dynamic Conservative Party to be afraid of. I think the Conservatives know that the NDP is actually a growth area for them. And so the NDP feels that flank. And I think that if you start a parliamentary investigation, you can rile up the NDP and you can get them, their NDP members of parliament, to be the ones that are going to carry that attack message, to carry that message of the Pierre Poilievre is this evil man that's bringing in the white supremacists. Pierre Poilievre is the one that's putting Ana Poilievre in danger. That actually fits Jagmeet Singh's message box much better than Justin Trudeau's, because Jagmeet is also a person of color and so can empathize a little bit better with Ana Poilievre in that position. So if the Liberals build that bridge and allow the NDP to walk over it, I think that works for them and they can be an effective messenger, and that opens a space for the Liberals on the other end, particularly Justin Trudeau, to be going back to the hopeful man, to be bringing some sort of freaking dream. Like we've really missed the vision. If he can come back with a plan to get us out of this shithole and start selling it to us again, while the NDP is hammering, and of course aided by the Liberal backbenchers in committee, hammering the Conservatives for their ties to these extremists, I think that's a sort of perfect hope and change balance. And then it also, of course, gives Justin Trudeau the opportunity to say, oh, Parliament is too nasty and Parliament's too horrible. That's why we need to go back to the polls and get a majority mandate. Like it's sort of the perfect play for him in that regard. And it's a trap that both the NDP and the Conservatives can fall into. But as you said, Liam, it only works if he has a genuine plan, if he has a genuine vision that he's willing to sell. If he just spins the tires.
If his plan is to coast, he's hooped.
Yeah, I do agree. Like this isn't enough to win the election. I do think that this this strategy, if you'd want to go pure negative, it's probably enough that you can fight to a draw. I mean, women voters are incredibly important. I don't think you can just lose them. So if the conservative or if the liberal strategy works and they can peel away a lot of those women voters from them, not necessarily to get towards the liberal camp, but to stop them from voting, I think they can block Pierre Poilievre from winning a majority government. But that doesn't help you if the liberals are down to the mid-20s in their vote preference. That just means we just have complete chaos in Parliament. That's not the alternative we want. Pierre Poilievre can take over in chaos, just as Stephen Harper was able to rule in a minority, even when he had three other parties that had no interest in governing with him. He just was a bully, basically.
You know, if we just had switched away from first past the post, our current electoral system.
Oh, that was an option?
Which we can. I know I'm kind of going into what ifs and it didn't happen, but can you imagine for a minute if we had just done that? Then all of the left parties could assemble a governing coalition that would keep bozos like this out of power. But the fact is, right now, the three major parties are so unpopular, they're all hovering somewhere around 30%, and they could probably still get a majority of the seats with 35. That's how bad our system is. Yep. Do you know that, I forget what the stat was, but I was listening to the Curse of Politics, which is that podcast we like to listen to with Scott Reed and David Hurley and some other folks. And it was something like 17 or 18% of eligible Ontario voters elected Doug Ford's majority.
Yeah. In 2011, there was only 16% of Canadian voters elected Stephen Harper's majority in 2011 as well.
Yeah, a lot of people stayed home. A lot of liberals stayed home.
Yeah, that's what happens. And that's all Pierre Poilievre really needs.
He just wants liberals to stay home. And that's I think my biggest fear and your biggest fear is that liberals stay home because they're not like we can't, like, what I will say is it would be an error, even if you're Jenny Byrne, who's a dark master of the arts of politics, to doubt Justin Trudeau's campaigning ability. She doubted it in 2015. She tried to treat him like he was a 4-year-old child, which, okay, nobody's saying he's as deep intellectually as Trudeau Sr., but he's not a 4-year-old child either, particularly not when it comes to campaigning. So that was a huge tactical error. Nothing says that there couldn't be a tactical error on their end again. I mean, they've already tripped over their own feet 3 campaigns in a row. Like, no one's saying they couldn't do it a 4th time. I think the danger is assuming that. I think especially a lot of partisan liberals want to assume that they can steamroll over this guy with a bunch of scary ads and culture war stuff like they had with every other leader in the past. And I think that's part of it. Like when you say we need to have ads with him and Mackenzie and then like what his wife and all that, like what the horrible thing he said or some sort of abridged version of the horrible thing he said.
Agreed.
To kind of sell the point across. Like, yeah, I agree. That's one way to accomplish that. But it cannot be accompanied by a prime minister who people question why he even is there, because he seems to have no interest in actually governing the country, or they will get clubbed by all, 15% of Canadians that show up or whatever.
It would have to be a truly horrible thing to happen in order for that message to supersede everything that's happening in the economy. Like it's a strategy that could only possibly work if the salience of that issue somehow eclipsed the economy. But
if they don't have anything to say that's coherent on the economy in this current climate, which, as you're saying, is subject to change, if they don't have anything to say, they're screwed.
But there's a counterpoint to that. But like, if you think in the United States, there was a similar way that the Democrats were projected to lose horribly in the midterms all the way until June when the Roe v. Wade decision happened. And then the salience of abortion rights, of women's rights, suddenly eclipsed that of economic downturn and inflation. So there are events that could potentially make something like this more salient and could potentially make Pierre Poilievre's position on this look much worse. Unfortunately, those are not events that are good, particularly for women. Like there would have to be some sort of I don't know, if there was like another mass shoot, like Polytechnique, like a mass shooting or something like that, like a misogynistic act of violence, which sadly is not even close to impossible. Messages like this could become more salient and probably could become even more important in the minds of voters than the economy, particularly as inflation is slowing down. So I don't want to preclude the possibility that this that this is could be a winning strategy. It's just not a winning strategy in a world that I necessarily want to live in. So I do agree that if we're talking about the facts of the universe as they exist now, certainly while this strategy is going to be important for softening female support for the Conservative Party, yeah, Justin Trudeau absolutely needs to strengthen his own support in that demographic by actually, getting to the fucking point.
Yeah. Well, and they were talking about focus groups on the Curse of Politics, and because they had Corey Tznake on there, and he said, I sat in focus groups with people who were swing voters, like these were centrists, right? Well, I'd vote for Doug Ford. Oh yeah, what did you like about what would you like that he's done? Well, he got me a vaccine. It's like, well, he did not, but nobody knows that. Yeah. So okay, what else? I don't know. He got me a vaccine. Like, people just, like, they'll have, like, the most arbitrary reasons for why, and there's nothing we can do to change that, because not everybody's going to look into the policy or ideology as deeply as we are. And is that a civics issue? Absolutely. Like, that's definitely a huge part of the problem, but that's what we're working with, right? It's not about, and similarly, I've said this to you privately, yeah. Jacob, I don't know if I've said this on the podcast before or not, but my dad would joke about the fact, and this is so accurate, that why some people would vote for, Bill Casey or whatever in central Nova Scotia. He was he was a member of parliament. I believe if he wasn't an MLA, then he ran for MLA. I can't remember, but he's just this perennial guy. He's been an independent, a PC, a conservative, and a liberal, all within like 20 years.
Oh my God.
And my dad would go, why do people vote for Bill Casey? Why do you vote for Bill Casey? He paved the road. He paved the road? Yeah. What else did he do? Well, he paved my road. You know what I mean? Like, it's like people don't, like, there's no deep analysis going on a lot of the time. It's not to say that people are dumb or don't care about hot button issues. They just view it differently. So you have to appeal to that. Like, I mean, I do get what you're saying where, like, sometimes the left's weakness definitely, or at least the left-wing parties in this country, their weakness is the economy. So the less you can spend talking about it, the better. But they cannot flee the field on the economy anymore. We cannot flee the field on the economy. So long as it's I would say so long issue. As it's
absolutely
number I would say so long
it's like you got to either do something like this, you got to do something like this where you deliberately try to make it less of an issue.
Well, if we come out and we try to and again, this is saying as somebody who cares very deeply about climate change, and it deserves, and the Conservatives will get hurt if they are seen to not have a coherent plan. They, mark my words, They will be hurt, and I doubt he's going to come up with one. We'll see. I mean, it would be very strategically smart of them to come up with a serious one for once. It would put aside a lot of worry, but I don't trust them to actually do that, especially under Jenny Byrne. We'll see. But what I would have to say about the Liberals is, if there's something that comes to mind like climate change where they want to make that the issue, I'm sorry to say, like, it's an issue, but if the economy's number one, people want to hear you talk about it, So I fear us coming out in an election trying to dominate with issues that people don't care about. And by us, I mean the left. Like, I'm not...
It's true.
If there doesn't come a situation where I absolutely have to support Trudeau, which is if, like, this riding was, like, neck and neck between Liberal Conservative, maybe I'd, like, throw up 10 times in a bucket and then vote for the Liberal candidate. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I feel the same way. Yeah.
Possibly. Like, that's where I'm at with these guys. Like, I'm not even sure I can stomach voting for them, which is really sad. That's how all this is played out, but that's where I'm at. And then a bunch of other Liberals that are angry stay home. That's like the absolutely disastrous scenario. That's the disastrous scenario.
This is clearly an important issue. There's clearly a big gender divide that's breaking up in between Conservative and Liberal voters. It's been happening for a long time, and someone like Pierre Poilievre has sort of expanded that. So I do think that does offer a unique opportunity for progressive parties to start jumping on it, and start jumping on it much more aggressively than they have. But if it's the only source to their salvation, they're not going to reach it. They're not going to reach paradise. You have to be able to still make a compelling economic message. Like, as I said, it's hope and fear. It's the carrot and the stick. You got to prove to people why they should be afraid of the alternative, but you have to still try to romance us a little bit. You still got to try to make us love you a little bit. And I know that's really hard to say about Justin Trudeau. I think I've exhausted all the love I could possibly have in his heart. He really played with my feelings of hope and
hard work.
Yes, hope and hard work.
And the middle class and those working hard to join it, as a matter of fact.
I was desperate for real change in 2015, and I did not see any of it after. And that's gonna be a hard betrayal to forgive, but he has to at least attempt to do it. Because right now it's like you're choosing between abusive ex-boyfriends and, who is it? You're going to pick the guy that beats you with his fists or the guy that beats you with the bats. That's basically the alternatives.
Or are you going to pick the guy that says when a left-wing protest rolls into your city that, that the point you're making must stop at the, what is it? Like, if I throw my arm, it stops at the point of your nose or whatever. Yes, exactly. When a left-wing protest rolls through, that's what you're going to say. But when a right-wing neo-Nazi fucking shit rolls through your town, you're going to say you're proud of them.
Yeah, you're going to bring them donuts. Yeah.
That's the hypocrisy that I think we need to be laying a trap for this guy so that we don't get into a situation where it's like a US 2016 situation. Because this could be our US 2016 situation.
Yeah. No, it's very true. And Pierre Poilievre's negatives are high, but Justin Trudeau's negatives are higher.
Yeah.
Yep.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly. And they're all around 30%, as I said. So really it's just a recipe for really lots of enthusiasm and definitely very high voter turnout compliance.
And just contentious and unpredictable results when you're at that level. Like you just don't know how it's going to shake up. And
that's right. Because the lower the turnout is, the more it bucks your turnout trends and your voting coalitions and everything else that you've drawn up.
Yeah, it's a dangerous time. Dangerous time.
With that typically happy note, we'd like to wish you a great weekend. Well, you'll be hearing this at the beginning of your week, so actually hope you're having a great week. But for us, it's just Friday evening, and we're going to have a great weekend and try to forget the shame and confusion that we just discussed. And if you have any thoughts on that, you can always email us at speechfromthethrone@gmail.com. That's all one word, lowercase, speechfromthethrone@gmail.com. And we will talk to you next time.
Bye.